The Simpsons is not a very coherent show. The post-classic seasons, that is. We all know how the story goes. The Simpsons stopped being good after season 8 and underwent a slow, painful death. You've heard this from every 3-hour video essay under the sun. But I feel there is a specific angle that has yet to be touched upon by all the other Simpsons content on YouTube. That being the structure of the episodes themselves. A big part brought up for why The Simpsons has gone downhill is the flanderization and the lowbrow humor that the show took on towards the later years. And while all those are valid points, well, not really, the new seasons are really good. You should really watch. Oh, come on, all you faithful, go watch it, go watch it, go watch it. So yeah, while all those points are quite valid, I have sensed that the biggest fail of post-classic Simpsons is how it takes on its plot structure. Structure is a huge part of how you enjoy something. When you watch a piece of media, you're expecting a beginning, a middle, and an end. That's how it works. You know this. You should know this. But The Simpsons, across its 3-decade-long run, has adopted a few different approaches to story structure. 3 to be exact. We'll be calling them the classic structure, the Scully structure, referring to the era of the show helmed by Scully, and the Elgin structure, referring to everything after season 12, with the exception of a few holdover episodes in seasons 13 and 14 that were show ran by Scully. Obviously, not every episode during their respective era follows these specific structures, as the show is quite well known for its wide variety of format benders. But the show consistently follows 3 specific types of story structure. Let us begin with the first type of structure, the classic structure. Despite being called the classic structure, we will not be going over the quality of the actual seasons that contain it. This will merely be a subjective analysis of the structure. Now, how does the classic structure function? The classic structure is the most normal of all the structures, as it functions the same way as any other sitcom. You have your 3 acts, Act 1, 2, and 3. Act 1 leads into Act 2, and Act 3 pays off what we saw in the previous 2 acts. We'll be using 2 episodes as anecdotes to help further explain how the structure works, those episodes being Summer of 442 and A Streetcar Named Marge. Both these episodes are connected with a very clear through line. Let's start with Summer of 442's story. Summer of 442's first act establishes the last day of school and Lisa's longing for friends, which leads us to Act 2, with the Simpsons family spending the summer in their beach house, and Lisa finding a few friends along the way. And the payoff of Act 3 is Lisa learning to be herself. The through line is the first day of summer, which ties this whole thing together. It's also Lisa going through the emotional arc of this episode. The other episode we have is A Streetcar Named Marge. The first act begins with Marge telling Homer and the kids about starring in a play, which establishes the family's unwillingness to show interest in anything she does. Act 2 has Marge not only get the role, but practice. It evolves Marge and Homer's drama and heightens it. Act 3 pays off with Homer finally realizing to be a better husband, after Marge performs her play, and he sees himself in the man who wronged Blanche. As you can see, the classic structure has a very smooth way of telling its story. Everything happens for a reason, and everything gets paid off in the following act. And also you can notice that it's all built on the family dynamics. Now on to the Scully era, and the Scully structure. The Scully structure is where things begin to spice up. Firstly, let's begin with introducing who Scully is. Scully, Mike Scully, took over after season 8. His style of humor and storytelling is known to be quite off the walls and energetic, wacky if you will, and therefore his era takes on quite a unique structure that's enjoyed by some and hated by others. Once again, you have your 3 acts, Act 1, 2, and 3. But here's where things get a bit different. Act 1 leads into Act 2, but Act 3 is nearly completely separate from the previous 2 acts, usually culminating with a huge strange event happening that is completely unrelated to the previous events that we've seen unfold in the other acts. We'll only be using 1 episode as an anecdote for this era of the show, as I think it works pretty well as a representation to what this era has in store. The episode we'll be talking about for the Scully era is The Computer Wore Menace Shoes. The computer that wore many shoes starts out fairly regularly, with its first act introducing Homer's computer, which he brings with him. The second act is all about Homer making a secret account to post fake scandals, and what silly hijinks he gets up to with tricking the town. The third act is where things begin to get a bit messy, and where Scully's trademark wackiness comes to play. The third act, as we've established, has very little to do with the other two acts. So you see, in the third act, Homer gets kidnapped by an alien society and is forced to live on an island forever. Oh, and his family goes there as well. It's not so much that the third act is completely separate from the other two acts, as the explanation given for why he was kidnapped was because of the fake scandals he was posting, but it's not really a logical go-to point from what we've seen in the previous two acts. Before we head over to the Al Jean era, let's recap on the structures we've seen so far. The classic structure has Act 1 lead into Act 2, and Act 3 pay off what we saw in the previous two acts, while Scully has Act 1 lead into Act 2, and Act 3 serve as a separate story from the previous two acts. Now on to the Al Jean structure. Al Jean's era is odd. It's the longest of all the eras. His era established a very specific structure that I personally hate, but nevertheless, here's how it functions. Al Jean's second act does lead into Act 3, but Act 1 is largely separate from the two acts that follow it, and not quite as much as Scully, where there is some connection for the most part. Jean's first acts never have anything to do with the acts that follow it. The two episodes we'll be using to showcase this are Homerazzi and Regarding Margie. Two not very good episodes, but again, subjective video must resist. Starting with Regarding Margie, you can see what I'm talking about, in that the first act focuses on two things: Bart and his friends spraying sidewalks in the hopes of scamming people in the neighborhood, and Marge winning a contest where a maid can clean her house for a day. Now, 6 minutes later, the main plot of the episode kicks in. Starting Act 2. Act 2 has Marge lose her memory and attempt to remember the rest of the family, remembering everyone but Homer, starting the emotional arc of the episode, being Marge not being able to fall back in love with Homer. Act 3 has Homer stand up for Marge and her falling back in love with him. As you can see, Al Jean's first act is quite excessive, with the plot taking 6 whole minutes to start up. But let's use our second example, Homerazzi. Homerazzi takes 8 whole minutes for the plot to kick in, once again showing Al Jean's highly unconnected first acts. Being that it takes 8 minutes for the plot to kick in, Act 1 obviously has a lot of things going on. We have Homer's birthday cake lighting the house on fire, which leads to the family losing a lot of precious memories. They then make a box to store said precious memories, and after those light up on fire as well, they recreate all their precious memories. Now Act 2 starts out the episode's main premise, with Homer becoming a paparazzi, taking sketchy photos of all the celebrities in Springfield, with Act 3 having Homer not release the scandalous photos in the hope that he gets something in return. And that's the Al Jean era. The first act is largely unconnected to the following two, which sometimes creates a false sense of hope, especially if the first act is better than the actual episode's premise, because then you're just left wishing the episode had been more on par with the first act, but that's how Al Jean is. What can you do? And that was that. I hope you enjoyed this little deep dive into the structure of The Simpsons, and see you next time.